Pacific oysters have nearly a quarter-century history in San Diego County. The Epicurean treat is raised here, and biologist Dennis Peterson knows all about the mollusks.
It's a very robust oyster, grows fast and grows well, and it tastes really good.
Peterson helps run Southern California's only aqua farm. The operation has grown shellfish in a Carlsbad lagoon since 1990.
Underneath these rafts are oyster, mussel, clam. The clam and the oysters are in trays that, like we've seen, the mussels are in the big tubes hanging beneath the rafts.
Peterson says, like any crop, oysters start off with seed stock, small larvae. They grow quickly in an upwelling tank that's constantly moving water over the shells.
Once they're of size, they're transferred to these trays and put out in the lagoon in stacks in these trays. At that point, they're brought in every 3 weeks and tumbled to keep them separate and to help them grow in a cupped shape.
Keeping them separated is important because oysters will glue themselves to hard surfaces.
They tend to form clusters on rocks set on top of each other, and will form, over a period of time, oyster reefs.
And that reef building ability has the attention of biologist Jeff Crooks. He says the non-native Pacific oyster, likely spread by water carried in ship ballast tanks, is gaining a foothold along the Southern California coast.
This is one of the biggest, most conspicuous things around now, but it didn't used to be here when I first started out. So it's only the last 10 years or so that these things have started to appear.
They are easy to find, especially at low tide. Crooks stands on the riprap in Tuna Harbor, adjacent to downtown San Diego.
So what we're looking at is a cluster of shellfish right here growing on this rock. The biggest one is probably 8-9 inches. They can even get much bigger than this.
Their ability to grow makes them valuable commercially, and it helps when they're competing for space in a new habitat. In fact, Crooks says the mollusks are ecosystem engineers. They fundamentally modify the area they live in.
Oysters, unlike most other things, are able to change systems. So they can form big reefs, they get very dense, they can help clear the water, they provide structure, and they provide habitat for other animals, perhaps, but at the same time they can take up space. Native species might be impacted.
That might not be a huge deal here, where there is very little natural habitat, but consider the South Bay. Pacific oysters could take over tidal mudflats that currently support a wide variety of life.
When they start growing in softer, sandy areas and attached to smaller rocks or other clams, then you really get the transformation. You get a transformation from a mud flat, a tide flat, to an oyster bed. And those are very different sorts of habitats that support different species.
Researcher Daniela Zaccarel says that's a valid concern. The UC Fullerton biologist has successfully reintroduced native Olympia oysters at a couple of Southern California locations. They were nearly fished and polluted out of existence. She's considered a local restoration effort, but she concedes the Pacific oysters might outcompete the smaller, slower-growing natives. Even so, she says, it would be interesting to see a key habitat type return to the region.
Imagine a whole habitat type completely disappeared, like all the kelp forests, and what an enormous impact that would have on community diversity or on habitat structure. So one has to wonder how different Southern California estuaries are now than they might have been 100 years ago when oyster beds were present.
Zaccarel says the quandary is predicting the impact Pacific oysters will have. If that impact turns out to be bad, there might not be much that can be done. She says removing a fast-growing invasive species that's already established itself may not be possible. Eric Anderson, KPBS News.